Hi everybody, it's Craig and Richard here, the week 4 feedback video, and it's fantastic to be with you again. So many good discussions. Jen and Cheryl have given us a great summary of that, and one of the things that really strikes me is how much learning from each other, from all the learners, and the exchanging dialogue that's going on.
It's one of the best things about this course, I think, and a lot of our learners say the same thing, that the real sense of community, sharing ideas, supporting one another.
Yeah. Fantastic. Because we don't learn in isolation, and even the things that we think don't go well, we learn so much from, and especially when people are courageous enough and open enough to be able to share that, it turns what seems to be a negative experience into a really valuable learning insight.
Definitely.
So it's tremendous.
So thank you.
Yeah. Now, lots of interesting things about the cognitive sides of things and acceptance and letting go.
Yeah. Acceptance is a really good idea, isn't it? I should just accept that. But I think that the reality is often very different. And to accept something really requires that we feel it fully, that we experience it fully, and then bring acceptance to it moment by moment, rather than just deciding that, I'm just going to accept that that's the case.
Yeah, acceptance as in apathy, which is a different thing.
Very different.
And very often the acceptance, which is to actually feel okay that whatever is there at that moment is there, because often we practice acceptance with a kind of a way of, if I accept, then I'll make it go away.
Yep.
Which is a very subtle kind of non-acceptance.
I did that for 12 years, Craig. The first 12 years of my meditation practice, without realising I was accepting things, knowing that if I didn't resist them, they'd go.
Yeah.
And of course, that's the reality. We take the resistance out. Things do have a habit of just moving on. But I realised I was using it in that way, and it's not genuine acceptance. And then all of a sudden, I had to really ask myself, what would it mean to genuinely accept this, to really allow it to be there as it is? And that's, I think, when I started to really get it.
And it's one of the things that comes up most often in terms of dealing with something like anxiety, is people say, I tried mindfulness, it didn't work. But there's actually something that hasn't been seen, like this subtle resistance and frustration and irritation over what's being experienced.
Yeah. Related to that, of course, memories of unpleasant past experiences. One of our learners was saying it was easier to forgive than forget. And forgiveness, again, if we really need to fully feel the reality and acknowledge the truth of the situation before we can forgive. And we might not want to forget. With mindfulness, maybe we want to let go of the judgments and the resentment, but also just remember that situation happened so that maybe we can stop it from happening again.
Yeah, and have learned something from it and move on. And when the memories of the past come back, to think, I'll practice mindfulness, then that thought will never come back to mind again. It's likely to come back to mind. But if it can come back to mind, but we're able to just establish ourselves where we're here now, there's a thought about the past now.
Yes.
And reduce the reactivity to that thought.
Yeah.
Then it enters, it comes, and it goes, with less and less disturbance on the way through.
That's true.
And less tendency to fixate on the thought and elaborate on it.
Yes.
And that's not so easy with a very strong past experience.
It's not.
Grief has come up a little bit as well. And I think that acceptance and grief, if we've experienced something that really hurts, to be able to just be present to it, just to give ourselves that space to feel human with it. And not the resistance, then...
Yeah. I often say to my clients in my clinical practice, don't feed it, don't fight it, just feel it. And I think that's a good heuristic.
Yeah.
Yeah. And on that note, actually, a lot of our learners are asking about mindfulness-based therapies. And without going into any detail, there are a lot of really great therapies and programs. Mindfulness-based stress reduction, of course, one of the better-known ones. Mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, which was originally for preventing depressive relapse, but now being used for a whole range of things. Acceptance commitment therapy is very popular.
Highlights the acceptance component of mindfulness.
That's exactly what we're talking about.
Yeah.
And emotion-focused therapy is probably my favourite therapy model at the moment, the one that I'm using the most in my clinical practice. So all easily, can be found online.
And compassion, there's a whole variety of approaches to developing compassion, which just headlines that, and which we've tried to communicate. And metaphors are often very helpful, like, training the puppy in a gentle way and so on. This sort of cultivating the
self-compassion. And we go into a lot more detail around that in our next course, actually.
Yeah, which we'll say a little bit about towards the end.
Yeah.
Self-care is a topic that's come up a lot.
And especially for carers, caring for ourselves if we're caring for others, very important. Because if we're caring for others in a way where we're not taking good care of ourselves, it's very easy to burn out or end up getting caught up in resentment or some other kind of unpleasant state. So that care for the self, almost as the first step, is really important. And then we can take better care of other people in a sustainable way.
It's sometimes said, and I think it's a misunderstanding of mindfulness, that in some way that mindfulness is a kind of a self-indulgence sort of thing, thinking about yourself and
navel gazing and
and it's actually quite the opposite.
Yes.
To help us to stop thinking about ourselves, but to be more self-aware, to notice the body, to notice the mind, to notice the emotions, and in that way, through the awareness, to be able to care.
Yeah.
You know, why should we direct the caring to everything else in the universe and actually forget this little lump of mind and body happening here and not look after it?
And even though it starts off being about us, it eventually ultimately becomes about others, because we start to notice how we relate to them and things like that. Emotional damage to physical health, Craig.
Yes. The mind-body relationship, there's just so much on that these days.
Yeah.
And speaking about the effects and allostatic load and, you know, thinning the bones and all that sort of thing.
Allostatic load being wear and tear on the body.
That's right, which we talked about. So things like high levels of cortisol. So if you go on cortisol-type drugs for a long period of time, you lose calcium out of the bones. It's one of the side effects. And so things like osteoporosis and many other things we associate with aging are accelerated by all of this. But the good news is, and quickly flip that coin around, is that we learn to switch off that response when we don't need it.
Yes.
The body has amazing powers of restoration and homeostasis and all these kind of, it rebalances itself.
Yeah.
Whatever's too high comes down, whatever's too low comes up. And so it's much better to feel optimistic rather than start ruminating about, the damage I've done to myself.
Well, I was going to say, some of our learners' comments almost sort of verged on self-criticism or self-blame. And I think to take responsibility for the impact that our thinking and behaviour has on our body, very important. But to do that in a way where there's no judgment and making yourself wrong for it, where you actually, like you said, focus on the outcome, on what you can do about it. That's really the benefit.
And the mind-body relationship shouldn't be taken out of context with all the other things we do in our day-to-day life. So the food we eat, the exercise we do or don't do, the environment, and so on. So there's so many things that influence our health, not just our state of mind. But mind you, it's the mind that determines what food we do put in the mouth, whether or not we smoke, whether we exercise or not. So it's got those kinds of effects as well.
Which makes me think of attention regulation as the foundation for any kind of self-regulation, behavioural regulation.
Yeah. Now, a lot of interest in mindful movement and flow states coming up.
Really interesting, actually. Some of our learners were noting that they've had some very mindful moments throughout their lives. One talking about being in a swimming carnival at the age of 10, I think, and realising they probably wouldn't win the race and deciding just to enjoy it, jumping into the pool, just being completely in the moment, enjoying the movement through the pool, completely in the zone. Got to the other end, won the race. So amazing, and you hear that often, don't you, about professional sporting people, musicians, actors coming off the stage or off the field and being completely, having been completely in the zone.
And the paradox is that there's no concern about the outcome, the winning or losing. It's just all about the experience.
The attention's completely in the present, isn't it? In a really effortless way. And so there's a lot of relationship with mindfulness. I wouldn't say it's the same thing, but there's a lot of relationship, isn't there? Like bringing the attention into the present.
Is there a difference with trance, though?
Definitely a difference with trance. So something else, some of our learners talking about trance or being in altered states. And often in trance, the mind's wandering in a very free-form kind of way without much awareness of where it is. And
so
also,
the self-awareness is lost.
Self-awareness is gone. And we're also often chasing particular states as well of deep relaxation, using visualization, meditations, things like that. So again, there's an overlap, but you'd have to say it's a little bit different. And mindfulness is just about being completely aware of what's happening in each moment with acceptance, not actually trying to change anything or create any particular kind of state.
And often in a trance type of state, we lose the contextual awareness, the connection with environment, place and situation.
Very useful, and there's a lot of utility for trance. Therapists use it, people do auto-hypnosis, very useful thing, but to differentiate it from mindfulness, I think is an important thing.
Yeah. Mindful eating has been something that obviously a lot of learners have enjoyed. So a lot of people have enjoyed the mindful eating.
Yes.
Although some have found
actually
it
tasting
stressful.
the food.
Yeah. I mean, it's a novel thought, but also some have found it stressful. And it's interesting in terms of mindful eating, say perhaps with eating disorders and various things, or for any of us, the eating, the attention's not actually on the food, or it's momentarily with the food, like an awareness that we're eating, but the mind just dives into a very subtle background dialogue. Oh, I shouldn't be eating this, and oh, am I eating too much, and oh, I'm going to put weight on, and all of these sorts of things in the background. And that's where the stress comes from, not from the actual tasting the food, but from the background dialogue that's often running alongside it.
Anytime we're doing something and feeling stressed, we can almost guarantee the attention's not just in the present; it's on some judgment or evaluation.
Yes, that's right. And and that's not necessarily mindful eating, but being more mindful with the eating can slow it down, taste the food, enjoy it more, etc.
Listen to the body as well. I was teaching some of our dietetic students here recently at Monash, and just getting them to listen to the body first of all. How hungry am I? What do I feel like eating? That's actually, I think, the first step of mindful eating, and then fully experiencing the food, savouring it afterwards. Yeah, things like that really important.
That's right. And if you pay attention finely enough, it won't be the family block of chocolate. You'll notice that the body's actually screaming out for a carrot stick. So that's
or maybe a couple of squares of chocolate. Let's be realistic, right? Yeah, and the formal practice as well, 20 minutes of meditation. And interesting that the different experiences that people have then. Some of our learners finding that in 20 minutes, the mind can really start to calm down. That first 5 minutes just being all the mental clutter starting to clear and the mind starting to calm down. Others found it unbelievably long, getting sleepy or agitated. And I think 20 minutes is a really good amount of meditation. If you can be doing that every day, you're doing very well. And it gives us time to really start to notice some of the natural tendencies, or you could say obstacles. In the classical meditation literature, agitation in the mind and sleepiness, dullness, they're both considered to be sort of very common obstacles, and learning to work with them, relaxing a little bit if we're agitated, training the puppy perhaps. If we're tired, sitting up straighter, half opening the eyes, standing up and meditating if we have to.
Yes, and so it's good to learn to work with that. In some of the programs on using mindfulness in a therapeutic way, like MBCT and so on, the longer practices more regularly actually was associated with a significantly better outcome as well. So
for certain things, especially like pain management as well, to sit with your pain for a longer period, 5 minutes, maybe not long enough, 45 minutes, okay, now we're talking.
Or the emotional pain and so on. But we have to have insight and motivation to do that.
Just on that as well, one of our learners, or maybe a few of them actually sort of started to notice and feel bad about, some learners posting that they can meditate for 10 minutes without being distracted, and other learners saying, I can't meditate for 10 minutes. I've been meditating for 18 years, nearly 19. I can't meditate for 10 minutes without getting distracted. You're definitely getting distracted, right? And maybe sometimes we're not even noticing how distracted we are. And I think to notice the distraction, or to focus the attention where we want it, notice when we get distracted and bring the mind back without any further judgment or elaboration. That whole process is mindfulness meditation. Not about getting rid of the distraction, but about learning to notice it and come back.
So aim for practicing meditation for 10 minutes without having to criticise.
Yes.
And even if there's criticism, to practice not criticising the criticism.
Yes.
And when the pride comes in at how good I'm getting back at not criticising.
Well, that's a thought too, isn't it? I'm really good at this. Oh, damn.
Let go of the pride.
Great. Visualisation as well, maybe related to what we were talking about before with trance and absorption.
Yeah, well, look, visualisation's an interesting thing, and perhaps we could think of it in different ways. In some ways, you could use visualisation in a mindful way, like a concert pianist mentally rehearsing a piece that they're going to be playing. It could be an athlete mentally rehearsing. So the attention is being in a very focused way. And the brain's getting a workout. The brain's actually, the connections that govern that particular movement are actually getting a workout and stimulating
And the prefrontal cortex is obviously involved, the executive function in that.
It's focused, intentional use of the attention, and it is stimulating the brain. So if you're on a long-haul flight and you've got to play a concert at the other end, you can get in a rehearsal, even though you haven't got a concert piano on the, because it won't fit in your overhead luggage. So, and other therapeutic applications, people with stroke who have lost perhaps the use of an arm, and as a part of their rehab, they do mental practice. So they mentally imagine being able to move the limb as a part of their physio, even though they physically can't do it, will rehabilitate faster and better and get more function back. Then there's the kind of visualization, which is to imagine myself somewhere else,
Mountaintop,
some
beach, safe place. Yeah.
You know, and from a mindfulness perspective, it's not about trying to be somewhere else that's far away from where we are, but to help
That's
ourselves
the whole problem,
to
that
be.
we're not in the moment.
That's right.
Yeah.
And the kind of wishful thinking, I could be happier if I was some other place, some other time,
Yeah.
has a sting in the tail, which means we're reinforcing an idea.
Comparing now,
I
where you are
can't
right
be
now.
happy here
Yeah.
now. And so to learn to be able to be content and open with the present moment, sometimes comfortable, sometimes uncomfortable, ultimately is a lot more helpful. And so that kind of visualization is quite different,
Yes.
and not so helpful, especially in relation to being able to engage our attention with the things that need our attention in day-to-day life.
Yep.
Default mode is something that's come up
Yes.
a lot.
And daydreaming, what's the utility of default mode? Why is it there? Is it good? Is it bad? And it's very interesting, actually. I can't remember the source for this, but I was reading recently in a magazine, a science magazine, that creativity comes from letting the mind be in the default mode and at the same time activating the prefrontal cortex. I almost imagine, like, you know, if you want to let your mind wander around and be creative, it's like putting a sheep in a paddock and it sort of wanders off. But you want a shepherd there to look after it, right? You want to make sure that it's not getting into trouble or wandering too far out of the paddock.
Yeah.
And I think that's the value of mindfulness, that we have that self-awareness.
Yeah.
And so then we can notice as well when the mind starts to take imagining the future or the past for real.
Yeah. You see, the mind has an imaginative capacity. I think there's great benefit in that. But to be using it in a mindful way retains the ability to distinguish between imagination and reality, and to be able to distinguish between useful thoughts and less useful ones. So to give our attention to the ones that are creative, insightful, and to follow those, and to not give our attention to the stuff that's just either a waste of time or is downright noxious. And so we do have to have, in a sense, that ability to be aware enough to do that. But whether it's best to be in default mode when driving our car or walking from one place to another, well, it depends. Because it might be that if we're trying to do something creative while we're driving the car in city traffic, we might notice we don't really give it the same quality attention as if we got home and then sat down quietly and now really give our attention to that creative idea.
Yes.
Or, for example, we might miss something on the road and not get home at all, which is another issue as well.
Yeah. The attention being engaged in the senses is really helpful. Some people say that when they're walking or exercising or standing under the shower, that's when they often have those insights. And of course, when you think about it, you're connected with the senses, walking outside, breathing the air, noticing the surroundings, feeling the water under the shower, and suddenly and it's because the mind calms down a little bit, it's not so full. Yeah. Solvitiur or ambulando, that's a Latin term for it is solved by walking, which I think really speaks to this.
Yes, very good. Now, you've had some Latin today, no
That's
Shakespeare.
Right. No Shakespeare, but a bit of Latin today.
To be or not to be, that's the question. So,
and keeping up the practice, Craig.
Yeah. Well, this is something to reflect on what we've learned, to continue to actively engage that, but to also share time with like-minded learners, family, friends, to go places where people are interested in this. So we get those kinds of reminders, the prompts on your phone, links to groups and things to read that actually help to keep it in the forefront of your mind. Because we want to be more mindful in a month and a year, in 10 years from now than we are now. And so hopefully that you'll keep, and especially something that might help in that regard is to perhaps consider doing the follow-on course, 4-week course, which is coming up.
Maintaining a mindful life,
that's
starting Monday, 13th November.
Yeah, and so that'll be an extension of this course, and we'll be looking at particular things in relation to communication and empathy and relationships and so on.
Yeah, managing pain, mindfulness and ethics.
Yeah, so some quite specialised applications of mindfulness.
Yep.
So if you've enjoyed this course, then of course please do let others know, and
via these links.
Yeah, and post your feedback and your insights into this course, and just so that others can perhaps share in some of the benefits as well.
Yeah, and this course will run again next year, early next year.
Yeah, so those dates will be advertised for you. So thank you very much for everything, and thank you, Richard, and it's been great.
It's been a pleasure.
Thanks to Jen and Sherelle and Kat and Rowan and all the team behind the scenes, and Adrian, because it wouldn't happen without all of that support. So, and thank you to the learners.